Hello, everyone. Soldier Day Podcast is a product of the Non-Commissioned Officer and Soldier Programs Directorate at the Association of the United States Army. Soldier Day subjects focus on those topics that are relevant and needed by our soldiers and their families serving the regular Army, Army National Guard, and the Army Reserve. I'm Sergeant Major of the Army retired Dan Dailey, and welcome to this edition of Soldier Today Podcast. Last month, we checked in with Sergeant Major of the Army Michael A. Grinston for an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact on our Army, our soldiers, and their families. From the stop-move order issued by the Secretary of Defense to social distancing, to testing soldiers and their families, we have seen and felt the impacts across the force and our nation. These hot topics have been in the news and continue to evolve. For America's Army, these subjects continue to directly impact soldiers and their leaders at all levels, and many daily organizational operations throughout the Army. So these are great subjects to update on our discussions, and the right leader to have this discussion with, again, back with us in our virtual studio, is our Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael A. Grinston. SMA, it's great to have you back on the show. I appreciate you coming to talk with us today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's kind of trying times, but I know we're going to get through this, and I really appreciate you putting this together.
We appreciate it too, Sergeant Major, and I know the soldiers want to hear from you as well as our listeners out there. So if you'd like, want to jump into the questions, and let's get started with an update on what's going on there in the Pentagon and the life of the Army and the Office of the Sergeant Major of the Army. So, Sergeant Major, I thought today we'd start with a little discussion about the impact of COVID-19 on the stop-move order for permanent change of station, especially with the summer surge just around the corner. What does the stop-move extension mean for our soldiers and families?
It kind of means the same thing as it said before, is we're still under a stop-move from the Secretary of Defense. So that's kind of been extended, but with one small caveat is when he said, we're going to relook this. I think it was every 2 weeks or every 15 days, roughly 2 weeks, and assess it and see, hey, can we lift the restrictions? Are they still valid, or do we need to keep going with it? So I wouldn't be tied to, an end date on this. Just be comfortable that we're going to review this. And every once in a while, we're going to get maybe an updated version on the stop move. For right now, it still means that in order to move, you will need an exception to policy in order to do a PCS or a move.
As you said, you're going to review this every 2 weeks, but when does that stop move go into effect, and when does it go out to?
It's in effect right now, and the date in the memo was 30 June. So until we get past that date, or like I said, in every couple of weeks, they're going to review that and say, okay, we're good to go. So in 2 weeks, we're going to get another review of the policy at 30 June is a good date. But we still have flexibility to do an exception to policy where either the combatant command or right now it's through the secretaries of the Army, and he's delegated that to the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, can do an exception to policy to do PCSs. But the new policy kind of put in a little bit more leniency for some movement. An example is, are we going to let people come back from TDY? And we're starting to see some of those folks come back from their temporary duty locations now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously this is going to cause some congestion, Sergeant Major. And how's the Army going to prioritize who moves and when?
Well, the memo said school-age children from the SecDef, but we normally move about 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers and families every month. So as we backed up in March, and then you look at April, and then you look at May, just to add another 5,000 to that. So we're trying to prioritize according to readiness on who needs to move first. And we have to take into account our soldiers and our families. But there's other options that you have. We're looking at, do you actually need to move? Can we defer that to next year? So we don't have all the levers that we need to go, because I think it's physically impossible to just say, okay, there's 20,000 people that didn't move. Let's move all of those in July. So I'm not sure the industry would be ready to do that. And we're not sure if all this is going to be finished. Is COVID-19, is it going to be just gone in July or June? There's a lot of unknowns. So how can we safely move soldiers and families given the current conditions that we have? But I don't think it's going to be feasible to move all 20,000 that we haven't moved in July. We're going to prioritize, readiness, mission essential, the CSL, what general officers and nominative sergeant majors need to move for the mission. And we're going to go down that list. And then we've asked if soldiers and families would like to defer They can always request that through their chain of command. Each case is case-by-case basis. But if you want to stay where you're at, go ahead and submit 41A7 and go back to your chain of command and talk to them and see. And that's how we're trying to look at mitigating the risks, is maybe we can take some of those thousands and move them either later into next year or maybe just take them off the assignment.
Well, that's very good information for our troops out there. So bottom line is they got to remain flexible and they got to stay in contact with the chain of command. Just keep updated. So, Sergeant Major, many of our listeners know that we have soldiers deployed all throughout the world. And should this affect our soldiers, and how will it affect our soldiers? So do we anticipate their deployments will be extended?
Not necessarily. Right now, we're trying to mitigate that risk, and we've got soldiers moving right now back. They quarantine in Kuwait. Sometimes they may have a couple more quarantines. So we're trying to streamline some of the quarantines too. So, if you get quarantined and you're good, and then we get you on a sterile aircraft and move you back, you have to quarantine again for another 14 days. So we're trying to mitigate that so you don't have a quarantine in one location, then another quarantine in another location, and another quarantine somewhere else. So right now, we're seeing, based off of what the combatant command said, people start to move. We're starting to move those folks back from the deployment. And we do not plan on extending them, but it's almost like the PCS moves. Every one of those is a case-by-case basis. But right now, we're starting to move folks in and out of theater, and that's in accordance with the new stop-move guidance we got from the SecDef.
Well, that's good news for our troops that are deployed. Sergeant Major, switch subjects a little bit with you. All these actions are principally tied to protecting the force, focusing on prevent, detect, and treat. How is the testing process coming along at military installations?
We've made some leaps and bounds. And, I got to really give the credit to some of our ASALT and our Futures Command folks for getting us some of the testing sets. There's so many, sometimes it kind of hurts your head, is that you've got one brand, it's called a Generation 4, and it can test 4 per hour, 116, and it can test 16 per hour. So those are pretty simple. Then there's others that are much larger at our labs. And the Army has 9 labs, and that's where we put some of those bigger ones that can test like 1,500 in an hour. What a lot of people don't know about the testing is there's 3 main components to the testing. First of all, you have to have a machine that can do the testing, and that's what I just talked about. That's number one. So right now, I think we have 34 or about 37 sites have some type of testing machine, whether that can do 4 an hour, 16 an hour. There's so many different variants of that, but 34 out of the 37 have some kind of testing equipment at our locations, and that's the machine. But then the second component of that is actually the swab, where you come in and you can see that on the TV where somebody takes this thing and they swab, and then that goes into a container. So you have to have that component. But then there's a third component, that there's an assay, there's some chemical that needs to go into the machine that separates the virus so we know what virus we're looking at. So if you don't have all 3 of those components, that can be problematic, and you can't test if you don't have all 3 of those. So we have a robust test, and all of the 34 locations have all 3 of those components, but those numbers go up and down every day. So I can't give you a number of this is how many we have, because 2 minutes from now, it wouldn't be valid anyway. I can tell you we have the testing that we need to test those that are symptomatic. But one thing I will say is as we start to look at how we're going to open basic training according with our testing, the plan is we're going to bring soldiers in, we're going to monitor them, we're going to ask the questions, we're going to take their temperature, ask them all the same questions that most people are familiar with, and then bring them into our training bases, keep them separated, but we're going to bring them in for like 2 weeks. And 2 weeks, it's not going to be a complete quarantine. They're going to do some training. Plan on keeping them on PT uniforms so we know that they're in that 2-week period. They'll bring their food to them. And all our training sites have the test kits that all soldiers that are coming in as we start to do basic training again, at the end of that 2 weeks, they all will get tested. And then we can go forward and kind of open up the training. They'll get their combat uniform. So we're calling it the 2 week plus 8. So that'll be your 10 weeks of basic training. And that's how we plan to kind of get back at training with our testing. And we've got all the test kits at our 4 Army Training Center locations. we're on track with our testing for the United States Army.
Well, that's good news. Good to hear that we have a mechanism in place to continue bringing those new recruits into our Army, which is critically important, sustaining the readiness of the force. So, Sergeant Major, we've seen a lot on social media and on the news lately about pictures of military members, not necessarily soldiers, but military members standing together and not wearing masks. So could you clarify for us, what is the present guidance on wearing a mask and what type should they wear?
The present guidance is if you've got a non-surgical mask, we don't want soldiers wearing the N95 because we need those for our medical providers. It's a cloth face covering. Stay 6 feet apart. That's still the guidance. If you have to get closer and you're going to be walking in a crowd, then you wear your face covering. But every place is different. And I'll give you an example. Is if you're on Fort Myer and you want to go to the commissary and the PX, you have to wear a face covering. So each installation is saying, okay, we're going to open up this facility, but those coming into this facility have to wear a face covering. And a lot of those places are your commissary and your PXs. But the guidance is if you can't maintain your 6 foot separation, you should have a face covering. If you can maintain the 6 foot separation, you don't necessarily have to wear a face covering. And it's a cloth face mask, and it's something that you don't just wear forever. The face mask actually needs to be washed probably every other day. And this is actually so that you are protecting those people around you from you. And if you're wearing the mask, the other person isn't, and you're close to each other, then that person is not doing what we've asked them to do, and it can affect you. And you're trying to do the right thing, but the other person's not. So that's the basic rule. Maintain 6 foot of separation. If you can't, you should be wearing your face covering.
Yeah, and that's good information. And, that's probably the new social norm. I was out yesterday because I had to go get some gas and go to the post office. And that's the policy on all those type of facilities. Just you have to have a mask to come in here. And like you said, it's not just to prevent you from getting COVID, but it's to prevent you from spreading it. Because a lot of people are asymptomatic and they don't even know they have it. So thanks for that information, Sergeant Major. So with the wearing of masks, we've also been focused on social distancing. And you mentioned that a few times to stem the spread of COVID-19. And we know that's critical to prevent the spread. But what is the difference between social distancing and social isolation?
Physical distance means that I just stay 6 feet away from you. Social isolation is where soldiers, family, children, they feel isolated. And I think we all can understand this. We're just not made to sit in a room and not interact with other people, interact with our friends, interact with our coworkers. So what I've asked folks to do is look at, I call it PACE plan. When you go to combat, you got to have your primary, your alternate, your contingency, and your emergency plan of communication. But what I've redefined is that primary now should be some kind of virtual. We can still look at each other. How does that person look? So you get a lot of things are said by the expression on the face. So I asked the primary means of communication during this. If you can't see someone, see them virtually. The second means actually would be, and my kids would say this is a little old-fashioned, is talk to them on the phone. So the alternate would be, how does their voice sound? Do they sound, excited, or they go, something else is going on? And then the third, maybe something more familiar with the younger soldiers, is a text. So start with a virtual looking at somebody, and we've learned a lot of lessons on how we can do that. There's a lot of systems that can do it. I would say second is a phone call, and then the third would be some kind of text. But we still have to interact with our soldiers and our family, no matter where they're at, so they feel like they're still connected to who we are. And I think that's extremely important as we go through this.
Yeah, absolutely, Sergeant Major. That leads to my next question, which is many of our soldiers and our leaders have been given orders to stay at home. So what should they do under stay-at-home orders? Yeah,
believe it or not, I still think there's a lot of things you can do. And I start off with just set a new goal. You got to redefine what's important to you. Or maybe you can do some more goal setting and say, okay, here's the condition that the world is in right now. And how do I adjust my goals? Still have things to look forward to. I want to read 2 books. I'm going to do a correspondence course. Maybe I want to get in a better physical shape. I know all the gyms are closed, but I said the other day there's still grass and pavement. It's still out there. Most places still allow you to get outside and be physically active, and I think that's actually, healthy. So maybe you've got more time than you normally would have to stay fit. So have a new fitness goals. What am I working towards? When we start taking that Army Combat Fitness test, I want to get those 60 hand release push-ups. So setting a physical personal goal, maybe having a plan. I'm going to take a couple of classes online. Those are still available. And just reassessing those goals, stay connected to your family, stay healthy, and stay fit.
That's very good guidance, Sergeant Major. For me, Sergeant Major, much of the discussion we've had and here on the news has got a tendency to be negative and depressing, to be very honest. Can you share with our listeners some of the good news stories and positive updates from the force? And what are some of the signs that we're coming out of this? What's the hope?
Yeah, we're still continuing to train. We've said multiple times we're going to protect the force in order to protect the nation. We still have an obligation to protect the American people over our nation. And so there's some units that are still coming in. They're still training. We had a unit at 49 Cav at 1st Cavalry Division just finished their gunnery out in Germany this month. I'd just like to thank them and their families. So I think that's a good news story. We've had another unit that was out in Poland that completed their expert soldier badge and their expert infantry badge. And they did it with all social distancing. They actually had NCO teams that monitored that soldiers stayed physically apart while they were going through the expert infantry badge lane. Then they had someone else to go in and wipe down the machine gun. So those are the positive things where people are really staying connected. And then another one, what I got up from First Corps was they still had like competitions where the battalion would give the fastest 6-mile foot march person an Army Achievement Medal. They had to carry their phone. They had to have some kind of physical app. So, they didn't just post, hey, I did it in, 15 minutes. So they had to, whether you had some kind of Fitbit or some kind of watch or your phone, you said, hey, I've got this much weight. I do this 6-mile. You post that up on the screen. So they're still finding ways to stay competitive and stay connected through some of the digital means that we have. And I think those are great things for families and soldiers to do.
Yeah, and I agree, Sergeant Major. It's keeping active and keeping engaged. And this is a time where leaders need to be more engaged than less engaged, even if they have to do it through social distancing measures like digital media and things like that. So
the other day I said that right now a company commander and a first sergeant are mission essential. You may not be coming into work every day, but this is where your company battery troop leadership really has to dig in, and they have to be active more now than ever. Even if they're not physically coming into the office, you still have to really check on your soldiers.
Absolutely. Sergeant Major, there are places that have demonstrated success and improvement. Can you share with us what the keys have been to some of that?
Yeah, Korea and Europe, they're really starting to slowly feel that they can come out of this. And I still think the sharing of the ideas from Korea, being disciplined on their social distancing, and having the teams, when they see someone is positive, those contact teams, the trace teams. So they have a trace team, they have a clean team. Someone was positive, they come in, they can clean those areas. So having a trace team, a clean team, and then the discipline of the soldiers and the families in those areas. What's really kind of getting them out of this situation, finding a way so that they can protect the forest. And they've done a really good job through discipline and some of those teams that we put together. And we do every week, we do a pulse of the force where I bring in the Corps, some of the division sergeant majors and the ASCC, the Army Service Component Commands, and we share new ideas all across the Army so that we can make sure that we stay healthy.
Those are great initiatives. And Sergeant Major, I'll tell you, from a listener, we appreciate all you and the chief are doing, not only to be out there checking on our troops and making sure they're being taken care of, but how well you keep us updated on things like Facebook and Twitter. So please keep that stuff coming. I know people appreciate it and they look forward to your updates. Sergeant Major, unfortunately, our time has come to an end at this edition of Soldier Today. But as always, I'd like to give you the last words. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners today?
As always, I would like to thank all the soldiers, families, and DA civilians, especially our medical providers right now, and our Compo 2 and 3. Over 30,000 National Guardsmen have been activated in some kind of status, either Title 10 or Title 32 in the states. And we put together 15 urban augmentation medical task forces through our Compo 3, where they have 85 soldiers, and they're out there on the front lines trying to help the nation protect themselves. And I couldn't be more proud of our medical folks and what they've done, and the discipline in our families to be patient through this. But I don't want to forget, I really appreciate the soldiers. We've done well to this point. We do have to stay focused, but the discipline of our soldiers and our families is really appreciated, the Chief of Staff and myself, because as a military, we've fared through this virus so far. We've done well. And I just want to thank the soldiers and the families for being disciplined, doing their physical distancing, putting out the guidance, staying at home, and I really appreciate all they've done for us.
Well, thanks, SMA Grinston, and we thank you and the leadership of the Army for the phenomenal job you're doing up there as well. Our time has come to an end to close this edition of Soldier Today podcast. All of us here at the Association of the United States Army want to thank Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael A. Grinston, for joining us today for this great update on COVID-19 and the many ongoing initiatives across the Army. As an Army alum, I can say from all of us across the country, thank you and all of your soldiers for what you've done and all that you continue to do. And thank you for continuing to be the proud Army that we know, which makes us the greatest land power force in the world.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Army Matters podcast on iTunes and everywhere podcasts are found. Join us next Monday with a brand new episode of Army Matters with Army Real Talk. The Army Matters podcast series is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at AUSA.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission to educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and our supporters of a strong national defense. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. Have a great Army Day. Hua.